It's the year 1521, and you are a priest from Portugal, and you have been walking through the mountains of Ethiopia for months. You came here as a chaplain with a diplomatic mission, into a Christian kingdom older than your own, perched on a highland roof 3,000 meters above the sea. You think you have seen everything a traveler can see. And then your guides bring you to a small town on a mountainside, lead you across a field of ordinary red rock, and tell you to stop walking and look down. And there, sunk into the earth at your feet, is a church. Not a ruin, not a cave. A church, with windows, doorways, columns, a roof carved with crosses, standing in a pit the depth of a 4-story building cut out of one single piece of living stone. And then they show you another. And another. 11 of them, connected by trenches and tunnels full of priests, echoing with hymns. And when you finally sit down to write your report for Europe, you, a sober man of the church, an eyewitness, write one of the strangest sentences in the history of exploration. You say, "I must stop writing about these buildings, because if I write any more, no one will believe me." His name was Francisco Álvares, and that sentence is real. He even swore an oath in the text, by God, in whose power I am, that everything he had written was the truth, and still he was certain Europe would call him a liar. That is what Lalibela does to people. It has been doing it for 800 years. So here's the question that should amaze you. We give medieval Europe endless credit for its cathedrals, for raising stone up into the sky at Chartres and Notre Dame. At that exact same moment in history, in the highlands of East Africa, African masons were doing something arguably harder. They were not raising stone up. They were carving it down, sculpting entire churches, whole and finished, out of the solid rock of a mountain, the way you would carve a figure from a block of wood. No bricks, no mortar, no beams, buildings with one single seam, because the whole church is one single stone. Why have you heard everything about the cathedrals, and almost nothing about this? Let's get into it. First, understand where you are, because the setting explains everything. Ethiopia is not a newcomer to the story of Christianity. It is one of the oldest Christian nations on earth. Back in Season 1 territory, the age of ancient empires, the kingdom of Aksum ruled these highlands, traded with Rome and India, minted its own gold coins, and raised granite towers that still stand today. And in the 300s, under a king named Ezana, Aksum officially adopted Christianity. Decades before the Roman Empire itself made Christianity its state religion. Sit with that for a second. When your history book says Christianity spread from Rome outward to the world, remember that an African kingdom got there first, on its own, by its own choice, and never let go. The faith took root in these mountains and grew its own branch. Its own liturgy, its own ancient language called Ge'ez, its own churches, its own unbroken line of priests running back 16 centuries. By the 1100s, the age of Aksum had passed, and a new dynasty ruled the highlands, the Zagwe. And into that dynasty, tradition says, a boy was born with a strange omen. At his birth, a swarm of bees surrounded the child. And in the old belief of the region, bees knew things. His mother took it as a prophecy. The bees recognize his sovereignty, so he was named for it, Lalibela. And the town that now bears his name is the reason we're talking today. Because King Lalibela, crowned somewhere around the year 1200, ordered, or completed, and hold that thought, because honest history will complicate it beautifully, one of the most astonishing building projects in the history of the human species. Here is the problem he faced. His kingdom was Christian, and for a Christian in that age, the holiest act of a lifetime was pilgrimage to Jerusalem. But Jerusalem was very far away, across deserts and hostile territory, and in 1187, The city fell to the armies of Saladin. The road, never easy, became close to impossible. Ethiopian Christians were effectively cut off from the center of their faith. Other kings might have accepted that. Lalibela's answer was different. If his people could not travel to Jerusalem, then Jerusalem would be built for them, here, at home, in Africa, and not built the easy way. Now let's stand at the edge of the pit and talk about what these buildings actually are, because this is where your intuition about construction breaks down completely. Every building you have ever stood in was made by addition. Stone on stone, brick on brick, beam on beam. You start at the ground and you go up. The churches of Lalibela were made the opposite way, by subtraction. The masons began on the flat surface of the mountain itself, on solid reddish volcanic rock, and they carved a rectangular trench straight down, 10, 12, 15 meters deep, leaving a massive block of stone standing free in the middle, still attached to the earth at its base, like a sculpture waiting inside its block. And then they hollowed that block. Doorways, windows, pillars, vaulted ceilings, arches, upper floors, carved friezes, all of it cut from the inside out of one continuous piece of living rock. Think about what that means for the builders. A normal builder can fix a mistake, tear down a wall, reset a stone. A carver cannot. Every strike of the chisel at Lalibela was permanent. Cut one column too thin, break through one ceiling, misjudge one angle of one window, and there is no repair because there are no parts. The building is one stone. The masons had to hold the entire finished church in their minds. Every room, every column, every shadow, before the first blow landed, and then worked downward through thousands of tons of rock without a single irreversible error. Engineers who study Lalibela today talk about it the way you'd talk about carving a full-size cathedral out of a single diamond. The margin for error was 0, and they did it 11 times. And the details tell you these were not crude diggings. Walk the site today. The church called Bete Medhan Alem, the house of the Savior of the world, is the largest monolithic church on earth, a hall of 30-plus meters ringed by carved columns, all one stone. The Church of St. George, Beit Georgis, is the masterpiece. Seen from above, it is a perfect Greek cross, 3 stories deep in its pit, so precisely cut that it has become the image of Ethiopia itself. The windows across the site are carved in the old Aksumite style, stone imitating the timber beams and protruding joints of ancient palace architecture, a deliberate echo of the empire that came before. There are hidden crypts and galleries, a carved tomb said to be prepared for Christ, processional passages, and swallowing it all, a web of deep trenches and pitch-dark tunnels linking church to church, including one long tunnel pilgrims still walk today in total darkness, from a church of death toward a church of light, hell to heaven, carved as theology you move through with your feet. And the whole complex is a map. Lalibela did not just build churches, he renamed his landscape. The river running through the site is called the Jordanos, the Jordan. There is a Mount of Olives. There is a Golgotha. There is a tomb of Adam. The king was not making a metaphor. He was making a replacement Jerusalem, stone by stone, name by name, so that a farmer in the highlands could make a true pilgrimage without crossing a single border. It is one of the boldest ideas any king has ever had. If the Holy Land is out of reach, carve a new one. Now, how do you actually do this in the 1200s with iron chisels and no machines? Start with the practical genius. Working top-down means the mountain is your scaffolding. European cathedral builders spent fortunes on timber scaffolds and cranes and died in falls. At Lalibela, the masons always stood on the very rock they were about to remove, descending with the work, never needing to build a single platform. Choose the stone well, and they did. The local rock is a volcanic basalt scoria, soft enough to carve when first exposed, hardening with weather over time, and the mountain itself cooperates with you. And then think about water. Because a church at the bottom of a pit is, in the rainy season, a swimming pool. The builders knew it. The site is threaded with carved drainage channels, angled floors, and runoff trenches, engineered so that 8 centuries of highland monsoons have poured through these pits without drowning them. Tour guides love the angels. Engineers, walking the same trenches, fall in love with the drains. The traditional account says the work took 23 years. Do the arithmetic on that. 11 churches, hundreds of thousands of tons of rock removed by hand in 23 years. And you understand immediately why the legend grew that Lalibela's workers did not labor alone. The story every pilgrim knows says that the men carved by day, and the angels took the night shift, so that each morning the masons returned to find the work further along than they had left it. It is a beautiful legend, and like a lot of beautiful legends, it is doing honest work. It is the memory of a labor so enormous that the people who inherited it could not believe human hands had done it in one king's reign. And here is where this channel's rule kicks in. We do not clean history up, because the truth is usually more interesting. So here is what modern archaeology actually says. In the 2000s and 2010s, researchers, including a French Ethiopian team studying the site stone by stone, concluded that Lalibela was probably not carved in one heroic generation at all. The evidence suggests phases. Some structures seem to have started life centuries earlier, possibly as far back as Aksumite times, as defensive works, dwellings, or earlier sanctuaries, and were then recarved, deepened, and consecrated in the great campaign remembered under King Lalibela. In other words, the site may be older, stranger, and longer in the making than even the legend claims. An African monument built the way great monuments usually are, by generations returning to the same sacred rock. The angels of the story might really be the anonymous masons of 3 different centuries. Honest history takes nothing away here. It makes the wonder bigger. But the single most astonishing fact about Lalibela is not how it was carved. It is that it never stopped. Go to Giza. The pyramids are magnificent, and they are tombs. Their world is gone. Go to the Parthenon, a ruin. Its gods have no worshippers. Almost every wonder of the ancient and medieval world is a museum of a dead function. Now go to Lalibela on the 7th of January, Christmas in the Ethiopian calendar, the feast they call Jenna. You will find the pits and trenches overflowing with tens of thousands of pilgrims in white robes, some of whom have walked for weeks across the mountains, sleeping in the churchyards, praying through the night. Priests in embroidered vestments carry silver crosses through the same tunnels the first masons cut. The drums beat. The ancient chants in Ge'ez, a language that was already old when the churches were new, rise out of the earth at dawn, exactly as they have every year for 800 years. Lalibela is not the memory of a holy place. It is a holy place, in full operation, the longest continuously running miracle in this series. The masons carved it for a purpose, and the purpose never stopped showing up. The outside world eventually caught on. When UNESCO created its list of World Heritage Sites in 1978, the honor roll of humanity's greatest places, it started with just 12 sites on the whole planet. The Galapagos Islands were on that first list. Yellowstone was on it, and so was Lalibela, not added later, not an afterthought, recognized from day one as belonging to the shortest of short lists of things human beings have ever made. So we end where we always end, with the question of why you didn't already know this. Álvares saw the churches with his own eyes in the 1520s and predicted no one would believe him. And for centuries, Europe proved him right in the most telling way possible. when later writers finally accepted that the churches existed. Some of them reached for a familiar explanation. Surely foreigners must have carved them. Maybe the Knights Templar, they suggested. Maybe visiting European craftsmen. It is the exact same reflex you heard in our great Zimbabwe story. The walls are real. Therefore, Africans cannot have built them. Applied this time to Christian Africa. And it was just as wrong. There is no evidence of Templars in the highlands. There is abundant evidence, architectural, historical, and living, that Lalibela is Ethiopian work in an Ethiopian tradition, with Aksumite windows carved by masons whose heirs still maintain the site today. Ethiopia, remember, was never colonized. It crushed an invading European army at Adwa in 1896. So its treasures were never carted off to foreign museums, never renamed, never reassigned to imaginary builders who looked more like the textbook writers, which may be exactly why the textbook writers found it easier to leave the churches out entirely. Their loss, your gain, because now you know. So go back, one last time, to that field of red rock in 1521. You are the priest from Portugal, standing at the edge of the pit, looking down at a church carved out of the body of the earth, listening to hymns in a language older than your alphabet rising from the stone. You will go home. You will write your honest report. And you will warn your readers with an oath before God that the truth about Africa is bigger than they are prepared to believe. 500 years later, that is still the best one-sentence review this continent has ever received. 11 churches, carved downward out of a living mountain by African masons who could not afford a single mistake, and never made one that mattered. A king who could not reach Jerusalem, so he commanded one out of the rock beneath his feet, and a flame of worship that has burned in those pits, without one day of interruption, for 800 years. The trenches at Lalibela are cool and dark even at noon, story lovers. But stand in them at dawn on a feast day, when the chanting starts, and the sound climbs the carved walls toward the light. And you will understand something no textbook ever taught you. Some wonders were built to be looked at. This one was built to be alive.